At 35,000 feet, panic doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It started with a soft jolt, then a sharper tilt, and then nothing but the sound of air rushing past metal. No word from the cockpit, no course correction, just turbulence that wasn't on the radar, and a woman in seat 22B who stopped blinking. She hadn't touched a flight control in years. She wasn't even supposed to be here today. But when the pilots went down, she stood up. And what happened next turned a forgotten past into the only thing keeping 190 souls alive. This is her story. Welcome to the Velvo Stories, where ordinary passengers become legends, where instincts matter more than ranks, and where courage can sit quietly until it's called to the front. Terminal D at Dallas-Fort Worth buzzed like any other Thursday morning. Laptop clicks, rolling suitcases, and the muted sound of a CNN broadcast echoing off polished tile. Gate 47 was boarding for Flight 421 to Portland, and most passengers looked like business travelers, half asleep and caffeinated. One of them was a woman in her mid-30s, nothing unusual. Simple navy t-shirt, jeans, hair in a loose bun. She stood near the back of the boarding line, thumbing through an old paperback. She wasn't rushing. She didn't even glance at the boarding screen again. She already knew the gate. She'd known it since 5 a.m. when she got the standby confirmation. Her name was Dana Merrill, seat 22B, middle seat. Nothing glamorous, nothing important. To everyone else, she was just a last-minute fill-in, a woman on a budget ticket, sipping a lukewarm coffee. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Dana Merrill hadn't always been a software consultant. She hadn't always been invisible. Once, 7 years ago, she wore a flight suit, trained under Lockheed's civilian pilot contract, logged hours in pressurized cockpits, flew flight simulations at altitudes most people never think about. She even passed the psych panel, until the day she didn't. A month before final certification, her younger brother died in a car crash. Dana tried to push through, but her reaction time in the stress drills slipped just enough for the review board to recommend delay. She walked away before they could ask her to. She hadn't flown since. She took her seat without speaking to anyone. The man in 22A was already snoring softly against the window. The woman in 22C wore earbuds and was locked into a true crime podcast. Dana simply tucked her book into the seatback pocket, buckled in, and let her eyes close. She didn't plan on sleeping. She was trained never to. Instead, she listened. To the pattern of engine hum, to the subtle hydraulic clicks during flap retraction, to the cadence of the captain's voice when he made his welcome announcement. It was habit, not fear, not paranoia, just old training she never bothered to forget. The flight leveled out at cruising altitude. Beverage carts rolled. The man next to her asked for tomato juice. Dana declined anything. She didn't drink on planes. She didn't eat either. Something about being at 35,000 feet always made her body feel alert, like it was waiting to be summoned. And that's exactly what happened. Just past hour 2, something changed. It was subtle, a short vibration through the floor beneath her. The kind that comes not from turbulence, but from systems recalibrating under stress. Dana opened her eyes. The overhead lights flickered. Once. Then again. The seatbelt sign pinged back on, though there'd been no announcement. And then came the silence. Not normal silence. Cockpit silence. No update, no turbulence warning, no captain's voice. Just that unnaturally creeping realization that something was off. She looked at the flight attendants. 2 of them gathered at the front, whispering fast, one holding a phone to her ear, the other glancing nervously down the aisle. Then came the dip, sharp, jarring, not coordinated. Drinks spilled, a few passengers gasped. Dana's hands gripped the armrests, not out of fear, but calculation. She knew they were descending, too quickly and unevenly. Then came a sound that shouldn't have happened.
An oxygen mask compartment partially deployed, then snapped back into place. Half a malfunction, half a warning. She turned to the flight attendant walking by, voice calm but unmistakably clear. If the cockpit's not responding, you need to tell someone this plane is unstable. I need to speak to the crew. The attendant paused. Ma'am, please stay seated. I'm a former Lockheed trainee, civilian pilot track. I've flown Level D simulators. If you're experiencing system interruption and crew unresponsiveness, I need access, now. The attendant stared at her for a long moment. Dana didn't blink. Seconds passed. The intercom stayed dead. The lights flickered again, and finally, the attendant turned and moved quickly toward the cockpit.
Dana watched her disappear behind the curtain. She didn't move, didn't breathe too hard, just sat in 22B, waiting for a decision that might change the fate of everyone on board. And when the attendant returned, face pale, she didn't speak. She just nodded once. Dana stood up and walked toward the front of the plane, toward the cockpit where silence had taken hold, where 35,000 feet of sky separated them from either survival or history. The curtain parted, and Dana stepped into a narrow corridor lit only by faint amber glow strips. The hum of the plane was louder here, more visceral, like being inside a living machine that was breathing unevenly. The cockpit door was slightly ajar, not open, just cracked enough for a wisp of smoke to escape. The flight attendant said nothing as she reached out and pulled it open the rest of the way. Dana stepped inside. What she saw wasn't chaos, it was paralysis. Both pilots were in their seats, but neither was in control. The co-pilot was slumped to the left, unconscious, his headset slipping from one ear. Oxygen mask in place, breathing, barely. The captain was upright, but his skin was pale. Sweat dripped from his temple, and both hands hovered an inch above the yoke, trembling, not from fear, but from shock. The smell was unmistakable, overheated circuitry. Somewhere behind the panels, a power regulator had blown. Dana's eyes scanned the overhead indicators. Half were dark, the other half blinking out of sync. Avionics interruption, possibly a cascading failure. "Are you the passenger?" the captain rasped. "Dana Merrill, former Lockheed civilian program, certified multi-engine sim hours. I'm here because you're not answering your instruments." He blinked, trying to focus. I lost primary control. Backup won't engage. We've got power drift, nav offline, and I think we're losing pressure. Autopilot? Dead. Transponder? No confirmation. Dana stepped past the co-pilot and into the right seat. Her hands moved before her thoughts could catch up. Trim stabilizers, check. Manual control, engaged. Rebooting non-essential displays, pending. Throttle, half responsive. She toggled a series of emergency backup switches. 2 came online, 1 sparked and died again. The plane shuddered. Outside the windshield, the blue horizon line dipped, not steeply, but enough to suggest they were losing altitude, not by command, but by gravity. "Altitude?" Dana barked. 34,000, dropping. A sharp tone. Pressure alert. Cabin systems were no longer holding seal integrity. "Okay," Dana muttered. "We're not falling yet, but we will be." She pulled the captain's oxygen mask from its holster and shoved it toward him. "Put it on. You're no good to me passed out." He fumbled, but obeyed. She reached for the co-pilot, checked vitals. Breathing was shallow, but stable. Likely passed out from a pressure surge. No trauma, no seizure. Just wrong place, wrong time. Dana's headset connected to static. She toggled channels, catching fragments. "ATC, Flight 421, respond. Unconfirmed elevation." They were off radar. No transponder ping. ATC had lost them. And on the ground, someone was probably assuming the worst. "Listen," she said, voice steady, not asking permission. "I need full control. You're not out, but you're not flying. I can stabilize. We'll lose speed, but we can regain course. What we need now is—" A burst of static cut her off. Then a voice, barely legible. "Flight 421. If anyone, hear this, squawk emergency." She flicked the backup beacon to 7700, the universal code for a general emergency. A light flickered red. Not steady, but not dead either. Someone might see them. Somewhere. Back inside the cabin, passengers felt it. Not panic, but drift. Altitude loss. A sense of floating slightly sideways. That terrifying moment where the sky feels uneven. Flight attendants whispered orders. Bags were zipped shut. Phones were pulled out. Just in case. But no one knew yet that a woman from seat 22B was sitting behind the controls. That she had no recent license, no crew credentials. And yet, she was the only one in the sky who could read what was coming. Dana adjusted the yoke. The plane vibrated, but it listened. She looked over at the captain. He gave the smallest nod. No speech, no drama. Just the moment a command passed from one pilot to another, one who still wore a uniform, and one who left hers behind 7 years ago. Dana's eyes scanned the primary panel again. Most systems were either failing or ghosting, present but unreliable. She reached down and flipped open the auxiliary bay near her seat, revealing a secondary control slate, used in worst-case scenarios. Dusty, untouched, but still functional. "We're at 32,000 now. Stabilizers are partially responsive. Airspeed fluctuating, but she's holding."
The captain tried to lean forward. His hands still trembled. "I can help with—" "No," Dana cut him off. "You need to stay conscious. That's your job now." She tapped the rudder pedal with her foot, correcting a slow yaw drift. The plane was pulling left, but the response time was still within her instinctive correction threshold. If she could keep it that way, they might have a shot. She toggled through possible airfields on the remaining tablet, but the system wasn't online. No GPS, only cached maps. Outdated, incomplete, but better than nothing. "Nearest known airstrip?" she asked. The captain blinked. "Maybe Stillwater, but that's restricted airspace, military. I don't care if it's guarded by ghosts. If it has pavement, I'll take it." Her voice was steady, but not robotic. Focused, like someone walking a high wire between decision and disaster. The cabin pressure warning beeped again. She overrode it manually. Short-term loss wasn't critical, but they had a window, a narrow, high-altitude window. Dana took a deep breath. Her fingertips moved across the panel like a pianist searching for a familiar melody. She was flying without flight data. No functional autopilot. No weather overlay. This wasn't aviation. It was intuition wrapped in steel. She reached for the overhead circuit grid and began a hard reboot of secondary hydraulics. If it worked, they'd have flaps and gear for landing. If not, they'd be gliding in a metal brick. Down in the cabin, whispers began to rise. People could feel the slow tilt. They could feel the descent. They could feel something was wrong. A mother held her child tighter. A man pulled out his phone and began typing goodbye messages he hoped he'd never send. Flight attendants moved slower now, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't want to show how afraid they were. In the middle of all that tension, seat 22B sat empty. A young woman in 14D looked at it, confused. She'd seen the woman there earlier. Now she was gone, and no one had said why. Back in the cockpit, Dana toggled the emergency beacon one more time. This time, she sent a burst transmission, a crude ping with flight coordinates, altitude, and one line of text. Flight 421, system fail, emergency descent, pilot incapacitated, command assumed by standby, seeking nearest strip. It was a long shot, but it was better than silence. The panel flashed. One of the backup indicators lit green.
Flaps, responding. "We've got partial hydraulics," Dana said aloud, more to herself than the captain. She reached over, adjusted pitch manually, feathered the throttle slightly, then rebalanced trim tabs. The plane responded, wobbly but obedient, like a stubborn animal finally recognizing its handler. Then finally, a glimmer of luck. The radar console, previously dead, blinked once. A weak return signal came from the west. Dana leaned in. It was Stillwater, old, retired, half forgotten, but visible. A Cold War-era runway tucked between tree lines. No tower, no ground control, but it was there, and it was flat. "We're going west," Dana said, dialing in a heading. The captain coughed through his mask. "That strip hasn't been cleared in a decade." "Then they should be honored where the one's reopening it." She sent one final ping through the secondary channel. And somewhere below, in a dusty rural fire station, an old radar system lit up with a signature it hadn't seen in years. Flight 421. No route, no authorization, just a red dot falling from the sky and a heading that didn't make sense. The fire chief looked up, grabbed his radio, and muttered 3 words. "Light the path." Above, Dana adjusted descent angle. She knew what was coming next. A long approach with partial systems, unpredictable winds, unknown terrain, and no guarantees. But there were 190 people behind her, and she wasn't about to let them down. Not again, at 35,000 feet. The cockpit was quieter now. Not calm, not peaceful, just quieter. The kind of silence that comes when everyone's done guessing, done hoping someone else will step in. The kind of silence that means it's time to act. Dana Merrill exhaled slowly, adjusting the rudder with her foot. The aircraft had stabilized around 26,000 feet, but that was borrowed grace. Fuel was still draining. Engines were still unreliable. The co-pilot was unconscious, and the only runway that might accept them hadn't seen a jetliner since the Cold War. Still, the plane flew. 30 minutes, Dana muttered, checking her estimate again. If we keep the glide smooth. The captain was still slouched in the left seat, coherent, but clearly running on fumes. She'd given him oxygen, hydration, and stripped every duty from him but one: don't black out. And to his credit, he hadn't. But his eyes followed every move she made now. The same way instructors watch cadets in simulators. Only this wasn't a sim.
This was real metal, real gravity, and real fire trailing out of one engine like a warning flare. Dana checked the weather through the auxiliary feed. No satellite uplink, but visual confirmed clouds breaking low. Stillwater airstrip would be surrounded by treetops and uneven terrain. No approach vector, no emergency landing chart. Just her hands, and the sound of 190 lives breathing behind a cabin door that locked hours ago. She leaned into the headset. "This is Dana Merrill, acting pilot, Flight 421, currently descending toward unregistered emergency strip Stillwater. We are without official tower support. Requesting all emergency personnel stand clear of runway. Expect partial gear deployment. Repeat, partial gear deployment." She released the mic and waited. Nothing came back. But a flicker of lights on the surface, far below, told her someone had heard. A tiny blinking line of headlights moving into formation. Civilian responders,
Police, maybe even a volunteer with a pickup truck and a flashlight. Didn't matter. It was enough. She flicked the belly cam on. Static, then a warped black and white feed. Gear status, unknown. She tried the manual gear lever. A clunk, then silence. Maybe one wheel, maybe none. They would be landing blind. She glanced at the terrain ahead. Stillwater wasn't a proper runway. It was a former military training site, abandoned, underfunded, never meant for commercial jets. It was short, cracked, and lined with forests so dense any overshoot would mean trees instead of tarmac. "You sure this is your call?" the captain croaked, half rhetorical. "No," Dana replied evenly. "But it's the only one that isn't suicide." He didn't argue. She trimmed the nose up 2 degrees, slowing descent. "We come in shallow, no sudden changes. Keep the wings level. If we bounce, let her float." The captain nodded. "Flaps?" "Partial. Enough to slow, but not enough to stall. Reverse thrusters?" "Offline. Brakes only." "Gear?" She stared at the flickering cam. "Let's pretend they're there." The captain gave a low chuckle, the kind only 2 people in a cockpit can share. Part disbelief, part respect, part surrender. Outside, the clouds broke fully. Stillwater came into view, a stretch of concrete just wide enough for hope. Dana squinted. Yes, flares. Someone had lit the way. She toggled the final emergency signal on her dash, one long pulse, a kind of Morse code thank you to whoever had lit the strip.
They were descending faster now. Cabin pressure had leveled. The passengers behind her were quiet, too quiet. They could feel it. The angle, the rhythm of flaps deploying, the hush before a landing they hadn't been warned about. Some clutched armrests, others hands. One girl gripped a tiny plush fox and didn't blink. Dana kept her eyes forward. Airspeed was dropping. Stall indicators flickered, then went silent. It was now or never. "Cabin gear check," she called out. The captain toggled the camera again. One wheel visible. The others? Still shadows. "Good enough," Dana said. They broke the tree line. The aircraft dropped into the narrow canyon between pines like a myth sliding into legend. Every second was math. Every muscle memory honed years ago now called back like a sacred ritual. The nose lined up. The tarmac shimmered under the heat exhaust. The trees whipped past, just feet from the wingtips. Dana's hands didn't shake. "Hold," she whispered. "Hold." The wheels touched. A thump, then another. Not smooth, but contact. The aircraft bounced once. The left gear slammed down and held. Smoke burst from beneath the belly. She yanked the brakes. The stick jerked in her grip. The plane began to tilt. A right gear failure. She corrected. Hard left rudder. Hands clenched, eyes locked. The plane fishtailed, then straightened. Sparks lit the undercarriage. Metal screamed. Rubber burned. And then, stillness. They stopped. Half the plane on concrete, the other half bleeding smoke, but stopped and alive. No one moved for 3 seconds. Then came the sound. Applause. Not polite, not organized, just raw. Then sobs, then relief, and somewhere near the back a voice that would never be forgotten. "Who the hell landed this plane?" The cabin door opened slowly, releasing not just the heavy recycled air of the aircraft, but a pressure that had built for hours in complete silence. As the oxygen masks swayed gently from the ceiling, as if unsure whether to return to rest or brace for another jolt, the passengers began to move, first in uncertain, shell-shocked motions, then more urgently. No official announcement had come, no captain's voice to guide them,
just the unmistakable reality. They were alive. The aircraft was still, and something impossible had just occurred. Dana Merrill stood at the edge of the cockpit, gripping the doorway with white knuckles. Her uniform was nothing but a wrinkled cotton t-shirt.
Her face was streaked with sweat, the back of her hands darkened by burnt plastic from the circuit panel. And yet, in that moment, no one noticed any of it. What they saw, those who made eye contact, was not panic, not confusion, not even pride. What they saw was someone holding something heavy, something no one else in that cabin would ever truly understand. Responsibility not asked for, taken anyway. One of the flight attendants moved to her side and whispered, "The slides are deployed. We're ready." Dana nodded. She made no speech, no gestures. She simply turned back to the unconscious co-pilot, still slumped in his seat, and called over the medics first. Only after the crew had carried him out, his oxygen mask still in place, did she step through the forward exit and onto the broken tarmac of Stillwater. The roar of the evacuees rose like a wave behind her, cheers, cries, relief, but she didn't turn to soak it in. Instead, she walked away from the aircraft without fanfare, moving toward the nearest emergency vehicle like a technician returning a tool after a long repair. Functional, focused, finished. She sat down on the rear bumper of a fire truck, her elbows on her knees, her breathing shallow and controlled. The adrenaline was leaving her body now, and in its place came the trembling. Not from fear, but from release. For hours, her entire nervous system had operated like a wire pulled taut. Every decision had been an act of preservation, every breath calculated. Now that it was over, her hands refused to relax. She stared at them in her lap and realized they were still mimicking the posture of gripping the yoke. A paramedic approached and asked whether she was injured. She shook her head. He asked again, noticing the faint scorch marks along her wrist. She replied evenly, "No breaks, just memory." The man looked at her, puzzled, but didn't press. He moved on. Within 20 minutes, the reporters arrived. They always did. First, a blurry image posted online. Someone had snapped her silhouette emerging from the cockpit, backlit by firelight and smoke, and within an hour it had gone viral. "Mystery woman lands plane," read one headline. "Who is seat 22B?" asked another. Vans pulled up, satellite dishes extended, microphones readied. FAA officials and airline representatives were still en route, but the media had no patience for protocol. One reporter breached the outer barrier and called out, "Ma'am, were you a passenger? Are you a pilot?" Another shouted, "Do you know you've saved over 190 people?" Dana didn't answer. She didn't even flinch. Her eyes remained on the edge of the woods where the runway ended. For all they could tell, she hadn't heard a word. Captain Lewis eventually emerged from the aircraft on a stretcher, sitting upright but pale. His first words weren't to the paramedics. They were to a nearby journalist. "She flew it," he said. "Not me. She landed it." The reporter blinked. "Who is she?" "Find the manifest," the captain said. "She wasn't on it." That single line exploded online within minutes. A woman not listed. A jet that shouldn't have survived, a landing that defied odds. Speculation spread like fire. Conspiracy theories formed instantly. Was she military? Was she planted there? Was this a test, a cover-up? Dana didn't respond to any of it. She simply sat on the bumper, unmoving, as the world built stories around her silence. Later that night, at the makeshift emergency headquarters set up near the runway, a senior FAA officer approached her with a clipboard. He was sweating, clearly exhausted, his jacket unbuttoned and his badge barely clipped on. "We'll need a statement," he said gently. "You're going to have to talk eventually." Dana looked up.
"I know," she said, her voice hoarse. "But not now." He nodded, scribbled something, and walked away. That was all. No arrests, no accusations, not yet. Everyone knew instinctively that something remarkable had happened, but the paperwork hadn't caught up to the truth. Not yet. She spent the night in a field tent with a thin cot and a bottle of water she never opened. Sleep didn't come. Instead, Dana stared at the canvas ceiling and listened to the murmurs of other survivors outside. She heard laughter, weeping, the clink of plastic coffee cups from a folding table. She heard life. That was enough. By morning, the airline had issued a formal statement thanking an unidentified individual for their actions. An investigation was underway. The NTSB would interview every crew member. But the real storm came online. Hashtags trended globally. Footage from the landing, captured from a firefighter's dash cam, showed the jet coming in too fast, too low, and sticking the landing anyway. Someone overlaid music. Others made montages. Her face, captured in blur, in shadow, was now iconic. And she hadn't said a word.
The next day, the airline CEO personally flew into the nearby city and requested to meet her. She declined. He sent a message instead. "Whenever you're ready to talk, we'll listen." Dana looked at the folded note for a long time before tucking it away. For days, Dana Merrill's name wasn't officially released, but that didn't matter. The world had already built its myth. Every blurry photo, every half-captured video snippet only amplified the intrigue. She was the woman who wasn't on the manifest, who emerged from 22B and walked into the cockpit like it belonged to her. The story took on a life of its own, reposted, dissected, dramatized. News anchors speculated. Aviation forums lit up. Even former military pilots began offering theories, trying to match the footage to someone they may have served with, trained beside, or merely heard of. But no one got it quite right. Dana remained silent through all of it. She didn't call a press conference. She didn't hire an agent. When reporters showed up at her apartment 3 states away, they found it empty, cleaned out, no forwarding address. She left behind no digital trail, no statement, no social media tribute, just the truth. And she'd left that sealed in the cockpit. The only people who received any contact from her were the passengers of Flight 421. Days after the incident, each of them received a handwritten letter. No return address, no signature, just one page. It read, "You may not remember my face, and that's fine. You don't owe me anything. We were all in that sky together. I just happened to know what the controls meant. Some of you prayed, some stayed silent, some screamed. All of it mattered. You lived. That's what counts. Now go live like it matters." 22B. That was the only confirmation they would ever receive. And for many, it was more than enough. The FAA investigation proceeded as expected. The captain's testimony was clear. Dana had assumed command with full competence and precision. His official report used terms like exemplary performance under duress, unparalleled composure, and an execution of procedures that rivaled formal military training. When the board questioned her credentials, he replied simply, "If she's not qualified, then qualification has lost its meaning." Eventually, records surfaced. Dana had indeed trained as a pilot, once top of her class at a private aviation academy with ties to government contracts. She had served in flight simulations for high-risk scenarios, had logged flight hours, passed every exam until she disappeared from the aviation world with no formal demerit. No one knew why. Now they did. She hadn't failed. She had chosen to walk away.
The press wanted her everywhere. Morning shows, magazine covers. A major streaming platform offered a multi-episode docuseries about the incident. None of it stuck. She rejected every offer, quietly and quickly. She didn't crave recognition. She craved space. Dana didn't vanish entirely, but when she reappeared, it wasn't in a studio. It was at a small flight school on the edge of Colorado, unassuming, run down, forgotten by most of the industry. There, she took a part-time instructor role under a pseudonym. No one connected the dots at first. She taught beginner flight mechanics to nervous teens, walked them through emergency procedures, and showed them how to hold the yoke like it was a heartbeat, not a machine. She didn't talk about Flight 421. But one night, after a late session, a student, no older than 17, asked if she'd ever flown during an emergency. Dana paused. Then, for the first time, she answered, "I was a passenger once, until I wasn't." The student blinked, not fully understanding, but he nodded, sensing something sacred in the silence that followed. Dana gave a soft smile and added, "That's all you need to know." Years would pass, and still, aviation schools around the country would tell her story. Some would get it wrong. They'd romanticize the danger, turn the landing into legend, exaggerate the moment she stepped into the cockpit. But others, the ones who truly understood flight, would speak of her differently. They would talk about the kind of strength that doesn't shout, the kind of courage that doesn't need credit. In Seattle, a small memorial plaque was placed near a newly restored hangar at an aviation museum. It read, "To the one in 22B, who reminded us that when everything goes dark, one voice, one mind, one steady hand can bring us home." Dana never visited it. She didn't need to. She knew the truth wasn't in the plaque, or the headlines, or even the flight logs. The truth was in the sound that came when the wheels touched down. Metal against earth, air catching breath, life choosing to continue. And that sound for her was enough.